Welcome to another in the series of NJAPM webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about Zoom, and this is going to be a tutorial. It's a Zoom for beginners. It's both Anju, Jessani, and myself who are going to be giving this. So first, Anju, why don't you introduce yourself?
Carl, thank you so much for hosting these sessions. I am primarily a divorce mediator. I was president of NJAPM from 2005 to 2007, and my practice is divorce with dignity in Hoboken and in Clinton, and I am billing myself as a beginner in the Zoom world.
Okay, so we're going to break this into two parts. I'm going to be talking about sort of the technical aspects of Zoom, and then Anju will be talking in a more practical sense, and she's actually done Zoom mediations. I am a beginner as well on Zoom. I've used it for a few years for webinars, and I know enough about that for webinars. I've also done meetings, but in a limited nature. So I've done a lot of work trying to get up to speed on what all the options are, what the security issues are, etc. I'm sure there are people out there who know more than I do, and if you do, please share your wisdom with us. And the way you do that, and the way everyone asks a question, is go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll see a Q&A button. When you want to ask a question, click on that, write your question, and submit it. While I'm talking, Anju will be looking at the questions, and she will be asking them at the appropriate time, and we'll do the reverse when she's presenting. So, first issue is, why are we using Zoom? Well, Zoom is the largest provider of online meetings and webinars, and we've been using them for quite a while. We started on the webinars a few years ago. They've worked very well. It's a very easy service to use, and we've just continued it. You will have probably read recently that there are a number of security issues that have come up, and we're going to talk about those and how relevant they are to both what we're doing in terms of webinars, in terms of meetings, and what you might be doing in the way of mediation. So first thing, let's look at the screen that you're looking at. And at the top right, you'll see speaker view, or you'll see gallery view. And you should toggle between the two. So one's gallery, the other is speaker. See which one you like better and you can use it. Now I'm going to go into the screen share mode. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a green button saying screen share. And I'm going to use that now to show you some screenshots that I have taken before, and going to show you some of the functions of the buttons below, and also what you see when you go into the screenshot mode. So again, screenshot. So the way screenshot works is, and I'm going to tell you this before you see it, is it will allow you to see on your screen, you being the person going into the screen share, all the open applications that you have. So for example, if you have Word, but it's not open, it won't show it. So you need to open that. If you have a PowerPoint, you need to open that application. And then when you go to screen share, you'll see it. So I'm going to click on it now. And I'm going to go to, okay. Now you're supposed to be able to see now a slide. This is a slide, a screenshot slide that I took. And this is what I, as the person going into screen share, sees. The participants do not see this. It's only you. So you can see this is what is on my screen. I can go to a whiteboard, and we'll talk about that. I'll demo that. We can go to a document, screenshots, and some other screens. So these are things that I have open and that I can then select from. So I selected that one.
Carl, could I interrupt you to ask if you are on an iPad or a phone, are you going to see the same things that someone on an Apple or a PC would see?
I don't know.
Okay, so they may not be seeing the same things if they're not on a computer.
That's possible. I think they would.
Okay. The other question that got asked is people weren't seeing how to actually view the share screen. So if you could go back and show it again, that would be helpful to them.
Okay.
Before
well,
you proceed.
Before I get out of this, I'll talk about it and then we'll go back.
Okay.
At the end of these slides. All you do is press the screenshot button. That's all you do, that green button, press it. And then as soon as you press it, this screen is going to come up. And this is what is now open on my computer. So these are the things that I now have a choice to select from when I'm actually going to go to the screenshot. I mean, to the screen share. Okay. So let's go to the next. So now this is going to show you at the bottom of your screen. This is what you normally see across your screen. You have a mute button and a stop video button. If you click on the microphone, that will mute your sound. If you click on the stop video, that will stop your video from showing. So those are two functions that you have. Going into, if you click on this little up arrow right here, next to the microphone, these are the options that you will have. If you have an external webcam, it will let you select what microphone you're using. It'll let you select the same thing for the speaker, and it will allow you to test your speaker and microphone. So those are some of the functions that you have available to you when you are watching or running a meeting. You have the same things available to you with respect to video. So going to the camera, the little up arrow next to the camera, you'll see you can go to a webcam. I have a Logitech C920 webcam. I also have a built-in webcam, so I can see those. I can see, as the host of the meeting or as a webinar, who the participants are. So right now, this is only a screenshot, so it doesn't show Anju, but it's a screenshot from earlier, and you can see what I can do. I can mute all the participants, I can unmute them, and more. I see one person has raised their hand. Rather than raising your hand, would you please ask a Q&A? Because it's very hard to keep track of various things as we're going along. So I'd like you to use that.
Okay, so one of the questions that's getting asked is, I'm going to assume if I started the meeting, I would have these buttons. I don't seem to see them as a participant. Will we be able to get a copy of this recording later?
You do have them. You should be able to see screen share. If you don't, it's because I have turned that function off, or actually Zoom has turned that function off now as a security measure. But if you don't see that green screen share button, it's there when you're running a meeting. Okay.
And I'm going to suggest this. Everyone can get the free version of this and try it themselves. And that's the best way to learn how to use it.
Okay. So I see the questions are really are adding up here. So Anju, why don't you see whether there are some that are appropriate now or later?
So one of the questions is, how do you use Zoom for caucusing? We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yes, we'll talk about that later.
Someone says they have an older PC and they can't see a lot of the options. I think it's the age of the PC. I think it's that some of these functions have been disabled because you're not allowing parties to have share screen.
That's right. That's probably.
And as an example, we're not showing the participants to the other people on this call, so they can't see that.
That's right. You cannot see participants. The only person that sees a participant is now that's true for a webinar. The people who see participants are only the people running the webinar. That's different than, for example, a meeting, because a meeting, everyone is on the meeting. They're all sort of equal. The host may have control over it, but you will see audio and you'll hear video, the reverse. You'll hear the audio and video from all the participants in the meeting, unless the host or another person has turned them off or you've turned them off yourself.
So someone had posted something in chat. Don't post in chat, post in the Q&A.
Right.
Now, one of the questions people ask is it possible for you to just do a quick demo of screen share live, because they feel like they're losing something when you're showing a recording?
I'm going to be doing that in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, anything else on questions?
No, we're going to move ahead. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk about equipment. I use an external camera. It's a Logitech C920. This is what it looks like. Normally it costs about $45, $50, a little bit more, somewhere in that range. You can't buy this anymore. They're sold out everywhere. So they're really worthwhile. And what I'm going to ask Anju to do now is do a demo of switching between the webcam that's built into her computer and the external webcam. So Anju, why don't you go to your internal?
So first of all, I'm on right now the webcam, the same one that Carl has, and I'm going to switch to the one in my computer. It is such a difference, right? Right there, you've just sold me on using a webcam, because when Carl said use a webcam, I said, oh, there's really not that much difference. It's a hassle. It's not a hassle. It's so easy to install on the computer, and it makes such a difference on the visual. Although in some ways this is nicer because it's like, you know, you're not seeing as much detail, but okay, so I'm going to go back.
Okay, so it's worthwhile to get a webcam when you can get them. And the next question, next issue is, how do you connect your webcam? So it's obviously going to plug into your laptop or your computer. You have to find a location where it's appropriate to have a meeting. So this background is good. I could have a meeting here. It's satisfactory. I've tried all over my house in different places, and there's always some deficit to one place or another. Might be lighting, might be whatever. And some places I also have a poor Wi-Fi signal, and so you have to be careful about that too. If you're in a place with a poor Wi-Fi signal, you can buy relatively inexpensively some Ethernet cable. I have them in lengths from 25 feet to 100 feet. I've sent them out to people who've participated in the webinars in the past so they can hook into their router. They're not expensive at all. And if you're in that situation where the only place that you can get a good, a good place to hold it has poor Wi-Fi, go get yourself some Ethernet cable. Okay, next is, where should you place your webcam or the either external, internal, the best place is at eye level. So you don't want it down too low because it's shooting up. It's very unflattering. Shooting too high is not good. It's really best at eye level because then you are looking directly into the webcam, and that's sort of the most pleasing way. Next is lighting. Lighting should be in front of you, never behind you, because that will not wash you out. It will turn you more into a silhouette. You'll be dark and the background will be very bright. I use torchère lamps that bounce light off the ceiling, and that seems to work pretty well. I also have good windows in here, but it's a dark day. If I didn't have those torchère lamps on, it would not be nearly as good. In a little while, I'll put up how you test your webcam. Anju said one way is you can just start a Zoom meeting and look at it that way. But I'll refer to a website that has a number of other ways that you can test your webcam. So let's now go to, and I'm going to go back to screen share. Again, I'm going to push on my screen share button and go to, where am I?
And this is now live, is that right, Carl?
Well, you're not seeing anything yet, are you?
Right. No, I'm not seeing anything yet.
Okay. And now you are, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So now what you are seeing is what I am seeing on my computer screen. This is exactly what I see. So let's start with, and I have at the top, I have open a number of tabs on my browser. So the first tab to the left is the products, the Zoom products. So they have a couple of plans. They have a number of plans. First is a basic free plan. And I hope you can all see my green pointer, the hand pointer. Can you see that, Anju?
Yep, it's a nice little hand.
Okay. So the free plan provides up to 40 minutes of time for meetings of one. So if you have one or two. So if you have 3 participants, you're limited then to 40 minutes. Below that, you can have unlimited meetings, unlimited time, but that's not very useful for us.
Unless your clients are sitting in the same room together and you're mediating that way, which I've had that as well.
Yeah, you could. But the next plan's $14.99 a month. There's a discount if you buy it for a year. So it's not a lot of money. And if you're actually going to be doing this and making money on it, it's a small investment. Buy it month by month to see if it's going to work out. So it allows you to do all the scheduling, everything you want to do. You can record to the cloud and unlimited duration on your meeting time. Okay. Now, these are Zoom meeting prices. Now, what you're doing now is watching a webinar. And a webinar is an add-on and it costs a different amount of money. So what's the difference between a webinar and a meeting? Well, a webinar, think of more like a lecture in a college, professor sitting at the front and he's lecturing out and most of the content is going out, very little is coming in. You don't see the people at the other end. They might raise their hand and ask a question, etc. A meeting is just like you have any ordinary meeting, a board meeting, some business meeting. Everyone is a participant in the meeting. So they all have their audio, they all have their video. So,
there was a question regarding backgrounds, but I think you're going to get to that.
Yes, we can get to backgrounds. My advice is, unless you've got a very high-end webcam, et cetera, don't do it. They look generally pretty lousy. So this is the plan I would suggest everyone try. Again, $14.99 a month. It's, if you're actually going to be doing meetings and making money out of it, this is what you want to do. You don't want to fool around with 40 minutes and restarting a meeting. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So you've now signed up for a meeting, the $14.99 plan. And what you have then is a screen that looks like this. Okay. So you have on your left-hand side, that's your personal profile, a meeting tab, webinar tab, recordings, and settings. So this is the basic place where you're going to be setting up your meeting. And the first thing it says is, what do you want to call your meeting? And if I'm a little removed from my laptop, but I would type in there, just by doing that, then typing in, what's my meeting? Well, let me do it anyway. So it's webinar on, say, can't, I'm too far away. On Zoom. Okay, so that's what it is. That's my title. When do you want to have this meeting? We're going to have that meeting on Wednesday, the 15th. I'm going to schedule it for noon. And I always have to think, is noon AM or PM? Noon. Noon is PM. Okay. Duration. It doesn't make any difference if you put an hour in, it's not going to shut you off after an hour if you continue. I always put a few hours in anyway. It's Eastern time. Is this a recurring meeting? It is not a recurring meeting. Are you going to require registration? We do not require registration for our webinars. You're not, I think, going to require registration for your meetings. Registration just means that they have to fill out a form with their name, email address, and other information that you might want to have. With webinars, we don't want to discourage anybody from looking at it, and any kind of work that you give people, in addition, they might just say, I'm not bothering.
Well, there was a question. Oh, there was a question. Where will people be able to see this later?
This will probably be on YouTube, or there's a question of whether we want to make these private to NJAPM or public. Right now, they've all been public in the past, where you can find them on, just Google NJAPM YouTube, and you'll see all the ones in the past. It'll either be there or it'll be in a private place, and I'll let everybody know. Now we're at meeting ID. You can have two choices. They can generate one automatically for each meeting, or you can use your personal meeting ID. This stays the same. The security recommendation is generate a new one for every meeting. Because if this becomes known, the personal one, then they can just search for that meeting ID and see what's going on. This one is generated for a new one for each meeting, and that's the safer way to go. Here's your meeting password, and you have two choices here. You have a choice of either embedding this password in your invitation, and that's what we've done for this webinar, or you could send the password out separately. It would not embed it, send the invitation, and then the person would have to use that password when they actually want to get into the webinar or meeting. I think that's too complicated right now for us, and because I don't think we have to worry about the level of security that you might for some other applications. But that's something you can decide about. Video. You want the video on for your host and your participants. That's certainly true if you're a webinar. It's true for small meetings. If you ran it with large meetings, you might want to think about it in a different way. Audio, you can either call in to get the audio that way or computer audio, so you have both clicked. Now, here are some significant ones. Do you want anyone to be able to join the meeting before the host? I don't have that clicked because I don't want people joining ahead of time. And I would think that when you have a divorce mediation, any type of mediation, you do not want the parties being able to talk among themselves in a meeting, which they can do, before you join, because the chances of something going wrong are much higher. You want to be the first one on, and then you would allow the other people to join. Just like we did this on this webinar at 12 o'clock noon. I broadcast this, everyone, and that's when it starts. So I don't have that clicked. Mute participants upon entry, I don't have that clicked because, again, then you have to go through a step of reminding people. You have to unmute your video or your audio, etc. Enable waiting room. While you can click that, Zoom has now required, or at least by default, everyone goes into a waiting room for new meetings and new webinars. The reason you didn't have to do that today was that meeting set up prior to, I forget the date was, April 1st, still had the old rules, but any new meeting, any new webinar set up, people are going into a waiting room, which causes, it's going to have some pains to it. Authenticated users, I don't think you need to worry about this. Now, this is being recorded automatically in the cloud because it's a webinar and we want people to look at it in the past. If you're going to be using this for a mediation, you do not want to have this recorded. Right, and you can set that up either in settings, which I'll demonstrate in a minute, or just make sure that you do not click this box. Okay, and then you just save it. So we have now saved a meeting. And then there is you can do two things. You can look at sending this. You could right click this. Oop. I've lost it. Okay, what happened was I clicked on it and I lost it. So let me go back into screen share. That was a cockpit error there. Okay, so we're back. So let me go to, so I screwed that one up, which was always going to happen.
So you're trying to invite people to your meeting. Is that what you're trying to do right now?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're back. So we set up a meeting, and let's go to that meeting that I set up. Zoom tutorial. Okay, it's now set up. I had two ways of sending the invitation. One is I could copy it and send it, or I could just copy this URL and send that. And that's usually what I do when I send the webinar invitations. Your host video is on, your participant video or audio video is on. Let's see, audio, etc., meeting options. And this is just a summary of everything you can, of what you have set up, okay? When you want to start the meeting that you've already now established, all you do is click this button over here, start. You can set up a practice meeting and start it at any time. You can have someone else join it as a way of practicing it and doing a variety of things. So you've now set it up. Now, if you want to look at the settings, okay. So these are a long list of settings that apply in general to your webinars or meetings. So it's going to say host video is going to be on, participants video is going to be on. Some of them we have just gone through before. And I'm only going to look at the ones that I have clicked on, okay? Require a password when scheduling a new meeting. That's by default now. I'm not even sure you can stop that. Embed password in meeting link for one click. If you wanted to send out your password separately, you would unclick that, and then you would have to send out the passwords separately. Let's see, some of the other ones are important. Chat. You want people to be able to chat, have that chat visible to everybody. Most of the time, you do want to have that. On meetings, you only have chat. You don't have Q&A. And that's the only way that you can sort of ask questions. On webinars, you have 3 different options. You can use chat, you can use Q&A, you can raise your hand. The problem with allowing all 3 in a webinar is someone's got to keep track of that. And it's really difficult if you've got all 3 screens popping up saying, I have a question, I have my hand raised, etc. You want to be able to save the chats. It's up to you. Some people like that. Feedback to Zoom makes no difference. Co-host, if you have a meeting, a mediation, you're probably not going to have a co-host because who else is there? There would be a co-host if you had some sort of other meeting where you want someone to be able to control it just like the host can.
And I'm your co-host today.
I think you're my co-host, and if I haven't made you one, I will. Screen sharing, you do not want other people to be able to share the screen, okay? So you can see here, who can screen share? Host only, not participants. And you probably heard about Zoom bombing. That's where someone who is unintended in the meeting, not supposed to be there, gets into the meeting and is able to disrupt it by doing some screen share, putting up something pornographic or whatever it is. One way to stop that is to say that only the host can screen share, no participants. That may be different, and you have to think about that when you are in a mediation. Do you want the 2 participants in the mediation or the other participants in the mediation to actually be able to share their screen? I think that's something you have to think about, see how it works out. You don't have the same problem of Zoom bombing. It's a question of, are they going to be able to do it? Are you going to be able to manage it? Is it going to be constructive? Okay, whiteboard, no problem. And those allow participants to rename themselves. Sometimes someone's borrowed a computer and their husband's name has come up on it. Can they rename themselves? For our uses, that's not much of a problem. For larger meetings where you're concerned about Zoom bombing, they usually turn that off. so that the person coming in can't come in again with a different name, etc. Meeting in advance, we don't want anyone coming in advance. And the rest of them are, you can go through one at a time, but they're not as important. But each one has something, and you might want to look at all of them. But the ones we've talked about are the main ones that you'll be concerned about when you're setting up a meeting, especially for a mediation.
Carl, there's a question. The chat has not been disabled, so if people want to use the chat, they can to talk to each other, but we're not going to answer questions on the chat.
That's right, because since Anju is fielding this now, she has to look at the Q&A window. She has to look at the chat window. And then if someone's raised their hand, you have to look at that participant window where those are shown. That's a lot of extra work. So please just use the Q&A.
But if they want to talk to each other, they can use the chat.
They could use, no, I have disabled that.
Oh, okay, because one of our people asked to put something up on the chat earlier.
Okay. So that's what we're looking at. Okay. So one of the great things about Zoom is its really extensive library of help videos. So what I do whenever I have a problem on Zoom is I Google Zoom shares screen sharing. And I did that, and then I came up to this video on sharing your screen. This is a Zoom video, and it walks through it step by step by step. You can, whatever issue you want, I guarantee you, they have a video or some written material on how to actually do it. So that's really useful.
It's like learning to drive. You've got to get behind the wheel. It doesn't matter how much you read a book.
That's right. This is a matter of practice and what works for you and what might be appropriate on a webinar, what might be appropriate in a business meeting, might not be appropriate or a problem when you think about doing a mediation. So for a typical divorce mediation, we only have 3 people. We don't have to worry quite as much about the same things. So, okay. So while I'm on
can I ask you a question on, in a mediation, sometimes husband and wife may want to send messages back to each other that they don't want you to see. Would you be turning off the chat, or is that okay to have the chat on when you're mediating?
Personally, I would turn it off. You know, I would want it to mimic as much as possible what happens when you're live in your office.
Okay.
And to do that, you don't want them passing notes back and forth. If they pass notes back and forth in a live meeting, you'd probably say, you'd probably be interested in knowing what's going on. So,
well, you may say, if you need some time to speak alone, I'll leave the room.
You could do that. Although I don't do that. I mean, I can't remember a time I've done that or anyone's asked me to do that. But, it's always possible. My inclination would be that I would not permit chats between just those 2 participants.
So a question is whether, at the end of some of the meetings I've gone to, I've been able to download all the chats.
If you save the chats, yes, you can do that.
But one could also take a photo of the chats if you didn't have that function in theory of the questions.
I have these chats automatically saved. I don't know whether you can download them automatically, but if they're not, I can access them and send them.
So my suggestion would be that you have to make those decisions if you're the mediator on what you want to be recorded or photographed and what you don't.
Yes. And that's something I think you'll be talking about, or sort of the rules for the meeting.
All right. A question was whether you can go back from being the host to being a participant in a meeting.
Well, there has to be another host. So, you know, you have to designate, if you're not going to be the host, you have to designate someone else to be the host, because otherwise there is no one to run the meeting. So the answer is yes, I could designate you to be, if this were a meeting, I could designate you, Anju, to be the host. And then I could take that responsibility back again, and I could terminate yours. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Any others?
I'm trying to ask as many of the questions as possible. I think some of them are kind of one-on-one questions that people might need to ask. So I'm asking the questions I think that apply in general.
Okay. So we're still in screen share. And here is a website that tells you how to test your webcam. It's called LifeWire. And it's how to test my webcam. So if you just Google LifeWire, how to test my webcam, it's going to show you an online way to do it, an offline way to do it, and it's also going to do Skype and one more here somewhere. No, also just using your built-in. So a variety of ways to test your webcam. You certainly want to do that, because every time you set it up, you want to make sure it looks good. So now let's switch over to, and so I'm going to stop screen sharing. And we're back to where we were. So I'm going to talk about security now for a few minutes. Up until recently, there were very few criticisms of Zoom with respect to security. But now you've seen probably a lot of different articles saying that the security of Zoom is not good, and you should either not use it, or you should switch, or you should do whatever. And so it's always a question, I think, of what is your use and how concerned should you be with it. So, and let me also say, Zoom is working and changing things almost on a daily basis, so that they are very cognizant of this and they are working hard to improve their security. That's why, for example, for any new meetings, webinars, everyone goes into a waiting room. They just don't come into a meeting. You can set it so that if they leave the meeting, they can't come back into the meeting. You can change it so that once the meeting starts, nobody new can come into the meeting. And those are all things you have to think about. Some of them are just for the ease of running the meeting. Because then if I'm running the meeting and I've got to divert my attention to letting people in one or two at a time afterwards, it really becomes very distracting. Okay, so security comes in a number of different flavors. One flavor is keeping unwanted people out of the mediation. So we talked about, you send out an invitation. That invitation might have an embedded password. Where does that invitation go? How much do you limit that invitation? There was an article today in the New York Times about don't put your invitations on social media, because then you have absolutely no control over who gets into your meeting. And that's especially true if you've got an embedded password. We send our invitations out over the webinar, over the listserv. There's nothing to prevent anybody from forwarding that invitation to a third party. So, to an extent, we don't know. We've in times invited large numbers of people from other organizations, and they sign up, don't recognize the names at all. So there is always some risk that you're getting somebody into your meeting or webinar that you don't know of. How much of a risk is that? How difficult you want to make it for people to actually view your webinar. If you make it too difficult, you're not going to get anyone to view it. If it's too easy, you run some risk that people will get in who are unwanted. So far, we haven't had a problem. What's the worst problem we're going to have is that someone will become disruptive and we have to remove them. In my mind, so far, that's a better risk than making it too hard and no one watches it. And you also have to think of it in the sense of when we have a webinar or you have a general meeting, are you discussing top secret material? Are you passing on business secrets? Are you showing documents that are sensitive? And you have to think about the same thing with respect to, say you're doing a mediation, again, a divorce mediation, 3 people. Well, do you want to show the sensitive documents? Do you want the husband to be screen sharing his Schwab statement, showing his account number, showing whatever it is, all that? Don't forget, this is not secure. It's not end-to-end top flight security. But then again, think about it. Most people email out documents, and email is not secure. So anything you've emailed to a client that contains any of that kind of information, social security numbers, any kind of financial account numbers, et cetera, that is not secure. So you have to think of it in terms of what's realistic and what you want to do. I would say in the beginning, certainly don't send information, either lists through screen sharing, that you would want to become public. Don't do that. Okay. As far as keeping people out of a small mediation, well, you know who's on the screen. You know everyone who comes on. First of all, there's going to be a sound, which if you've enabled that, which I have, so you know someone's come on, and if there are only 2 people and someone else has come on, something is amiss, and you can address it at that time. Okay. So those are pretty much the security issues that I see. They are being addressed all the time. But whether
Zoom has said before they make any enhancements, they're working on their security. So
yes,
that's their charter.
You know, so for example, here's some of the things that they put out in that article today. I referenced New York Times. Don't share your Zoom link or code on social media. Setting a meeting password, yes, you need to do that. Create a waiting room. That's by default now. Waiting rooms are default. And also a screen share, host only. So now someone mentioned about putting people on hold or putting them back into the waiting room. Now let me see if I can find that. Okay, can you see that? Anju?
Yes.
Okay.
Waiting room.
Okay, so what I've done here is there were 2 participants, my wife. She's holding up well, you can see. And so I clicked on her. Up here, there's some buttons, and I clicked on the buttons. And this is the screen that comes up. These are my options. I can stop her video. I can rename her. I can make her a host, make her a co-host. I can remove her. I can put her into the waiting room. So I have 2 participants, and I can put her into the waiting room. So what you see when you've put her into the waiting room is hold on, there. No, wrong place. Okay. Now this is what you see when you put her into the waiting room. One person is waiting, and one person's in the meeting. So if there were 3 people, 2 clients, and I wanted to put just one of them into the waiting room, which allows me then to caucus privately with that person, what I do is just go through that process of clicking on the person who I want to put in the waiting room. You get that drop-down menu, put into the meeting room, and now you see that that person is waiting. They can't hear and they can't see. So then it would be me and the other participant in the divorce mediation, or however other number of people you have in whatever mediation you have. So that's how you put them into the waiting room.
Okay. A question was, if you have someone who's Zoom bombing you and you want to get rid of them, how would you do that?
You can just go back to, let's go back to, I can click on you. And if you clicked on as host, there are 3 buttons at the top right of Anju's screen. And you get this drop-down menu, and one of them says remove. I can remove you. Anju, you can do that to me. You'll see the same drop-down menu.
I see stop video.
Okay, you can't remove me because I'm a host.
Okay.
I can remove you because you're not. So I can remove any participant in a meeting by clicking on these 3 little buttons, 3 little periods at the top right of a participant's screen. And then the options are a number of options: rename, et cetera, and one is remove.
And everyone can click on those 3 can see 3 buttons if they click to the top right of their screen.
They can see it, but they don't have that option to remove.
Okay.
So.
Could you also show, or maybe you're planning to, caucusing, so you want to put people in separate caucus rooms, or is that something's not?
That's essentially what I just ran through, because I think they've limited what they've done is establish these waiting rooms. And that is how you do that. You put someone into a waiting room. So for example, I'm going to put you on hold. And now it's only me. Now I have to figure out how to get you back again. So I click on the participants, Anju, and I can take you off hold. Anju, there you are. Okay, I put you on hold. The proper way to do it is to put you in a waiting room.
Okay, now I have to return to the meeting.
You're on the meeting.
Okay, I can't see myself. Okay.
Okay, in meetings, you put people into a waiting room.
Now I can't see myself visually though, so okay.
You
figure it out. No.
Okay, we can see you. Okay, any other questions? You're fine here.
Okay, but I can't see me, so. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to you, Anju.
Okay, hold on for 1 sec. Okay, so I'm back. So one of the things that Carl was going to show you is the background. So my computer does not do backgrounds well, but I'm going to choose a virtual background just to demonstrate this. It looks very wonky. Okay, so, doesn't work very well. So I'm going to go back to none. I think you have to have a pretty powerful computer for those backgrounds to work, but there are a couple of canned backgrounds you can use, or you can put a picture of your office as a background as well. But I found that when I've tried to do that, it doesn't work very well. So I'm just using my room. Now, before we did this webinar and went live, Carl walked through every room in my house to figure out the best room to do this webinar. And every room in my house has a lot of windows, so I was getting a lot of distraction. So this room worked the best. And the other thing is my glasses created a lot of glare, so I put contacts in. Now, Carl's glasses have an anti-glare finish that work better. So you should really test out what your glasses look like. There's nothing I can do. I can't go and buy glasses right now, I don't think. But next time I order glasses, I'm going to make sure that I ordered them without the with the anti-glare. So I'm operating at a 101 level. And what does that mean? It's like when you teach your kids to drive and they drive local roads, but the first time they got on a highway, they feel a little out of control. So I'm using it at a very basic level. I'm not using screen share. I'm using Zoom as I would a telephone, except with visuals. And I'm finding that that works very well. And there may be a point where I get more comfortable and I move up. But I am sending out an agenda before the meeting, and I'm sending out any documents that I need to share with the clients before the meeting, either through Dropbox or if email, if they're comfortable with that. Sending the same to me so that I'm conducting this in a way that I would even if I were on the telephone. Carl talked about why most clients are using Zoom for work at this point, so they're pretty comfortable with it. But Catherine Newcomb and I did test other, I think, GoToWebinar, GoToMeetings, and it worked well as well. And I'm using Google Hangouts with my family for meetings. And one-on-one, I'm using Skype. So you can choose whatever you want to use, but I think most clients are comfortable with Zoom. So part of my 101 is that I haven't been using the caucus, putting people in separate rooms. I don't caucus very much, but when I do, I usually schedule time to meet with the client separately. So when I've been caucusing, I've been doing the same thing where I'm scheduling separate meetings where I meet with them for 10 or 15 minutes separately, but it's not part of my protocol to be caucusing every time there's a slight conflict. Usually when I'm in session with clients, I'll only caucus when things get so out of control, or they get to a point where it looks like it's not going to be productive and someone needs to have a separate conversation. So I'm pretty comfortable that I can continue doing it that way. So for me, it's not getting ahead of the technology, and I don't want to get into technology fails that, in a sense, make me lose control of the session. So for me, this is what 101 means. Carl, are there any questions before I continue?
No, there are a lot of technical questions, and I'll go back to them if we have any time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So right now, all the sessions I've had have been with clients who had started with me when we were meeting live, and then when we could no longer meet live, we went to the Zoom. I'm getting inquiries from people who I may have spoken to before who are now interested in mediating with Zoom. And for them, asking them to fill in a client information form, and I'm sending them my agreement to mediate before we start. I think it's some way so easy to schedule a Zoom, but you also don't know who the parties are. I think it takes a certain level of commitment to drive to your office. And so I want them to make some level of before we go on Zoom as well. And I also want to make sure, because of kind of heightened concerns about security and not knowing the clients, that I get some information. So I always am on Zoom myself. I don't want clients to say, oh, you know, I have a Zoom account, I'll schedule it. Because first of all, I think part of this is feeling that as the mediator, you're in control. I also don't want them recording the session, even though you can see at the top if it's being recorded. I think part of professionalism is that you're using your account. And I think most people would agree with that. I want to take go back a second to say, I've been watching webinars hosted by the APFM, mediate.com. I think there are a lot of people giving webinars who are much more accomplished in this. And you can learn by watching these webinars, but really, again, the best way to learn how to use Zoom is by using it. I switched to the paid service month by month. I think I Googled and found a coupon, which you will be able to get a little bit less. It's only $2, but why pay more? And I'll have to see at the end of this whether I've got enough of a client base. I mean, there are people like Woody Moston, who most people know because he's done, come and spoken at 2 of our conferences, who's doing a lot of Zoom work. There are people like Ken Newman, who's so excited about doing this that, you know, he's thinking that this is a sea change, not a temporary change in how we practice. So I usually schedule the mediation the same way that you did online, with a time frame. And of course, you can go longer or shorter, depending on what the parties want to do. I'm keeping them in the waiting room so that they don't have conversations or get into an argument. But I did have clients who are both sitting together in the same room. So that's also interesting. Control that, right? I thought I was sending out invitations and they'd be meeting from their different homes, but they met together to do the Zoom conference. And I'm usually scheduling the same as I do in person, 90-minute sessions. I have found that once you get over 120 minutes, you reach that exhaustion factor. I think there's some, the meetings shouldn't be over 2 hours. But so I think it's sometimes harder to kind of keep track of time when you're doing Zoom, because this is new to you. You've been doing so many mediations in person. It's a second nature in that unconscious competent stage. This is very different. There are a lot more moving parts for you here. And I would say this, that you need to figure out how to schedule breaks. And you can't have people leaving the room without explanation, because you don't know whether they're upset with you, something you said, or they're just going to a biology break. So it's that may be a part of a protocol to say, if you need to leave the room, just let us know and we'll all get off, or we'll all take a break. And I found it's a good idea to schedule a 10-minute break after the first hour. I don't charge for break time. It's good for me. If they have their kids and they need to take a break because they need to feed them food or put on a new video, they should be able to do that. So it's a little bit different when people are working at home right now. And so we don't know what's really going on at home or what stressors there are, but I believe everyone is under stress. So because I'm really doing this at a very basic level, right after the meeting, I am sending up a follow-up email with a summary. If there are child support guidelines, I'll send them those. I'll send them a balance sheet, and I'll talk about next steps and having the next meeting. So not very different in some ways from doing it in person. You know, it's easier to have shorter meetings because people haven't driven to your office. So the media session, I'm still following the protocol I use, and I'm talking mostly about divorce mediation. Now, I've seen some, yesterday on Maria Volpe's website. She has a very big listserv with about 4,000 people. She was talking about doing very large civil multi-party mediations, where before they do the actual mediation, they do testing to see that everyone's technology was not doing that. But, you know, I think it's going to be, when you have meetings, the more people you have, the more movements you have to this. For most of us, it's us and the clients. For if you're doing divorce mediation, maybe you have the lawyers in for some part of the meeting. The good thing about this is you can have the lawyers in for 5-10 minutes and then they can leave too. So it's not something where you're committing to them being there for the whole time because they drove to your office and they're physically there, and you can always, clients can always go back. So are there any questions before I move forward?
I'm just going to scroll to the bottom here, and several questions about what you need to put into your agreement to mediate, but I think you're going to be talking about that later.
Right, okay. In fact, that's exactly the next point. So if you've already have an agreement to mediate with the parties, I think you need to send them an addendum to cover some of the Zoom items, and I'll be making my notes available after the meeting. So I'm going to kind of summarize the 4 points that I have. That the first is only people who have agreed upon to participate in the mediation will be in the session. If either party intends to invite their attorney or other advisor, they notify the mediator in advance and the other party, so the other party can invite their attorney or advisor. And that all parties participating in the mediation will sign the agreement to mediate. So that means that you're not going to have your girlfriend sitting in the corner watching or, you know, being a silent participant in this either. Whether they are signing on with their own ID or whether they're just sitting in the room, they're agreeing that you're agreeing that only the people who've agreed to be in the room will be there. Now, when I watch one of the other ones, they ask the person to actually take their PC or camera and kind of do a 360-degree view of the room. I think that's really a little obnoxious. People will choose. You have to figure out your own protocol. What do you think of that, Carl? Asking them to do a 360-degree of their room?
I think the same thing. I mean, there has to be a level of trust here. And don't forget, it doesn't affect privilege about what happens in court with respect to anything. It's just, there is a confidentiality issue, but you have to trust that people are going to do what they're going to do. After all, why do you trust them to agree to a property settlement agreement? Because that's what they do.
So my first is the issue that only the ones who said they're going to be there will be there. And is there going to be no video or audio recordings? And if they're going to be photographs of any portion of this, is the chat, they'll ask my permission. Now, there is other computers that will allow you to record a Zoom session. And even though you're covered under privilege because it's a document, you still don't want that. People are saying, talking freely, they want to know that these aren't being recorded. So in your intermediate, add a statement about neither video or audio recordings are permitted. So let me backtrack to say this is the addendum, but for my new agreement to mediate, I've made this part of my agreement to mediate going forward so that whether I do in-person or telephone meetings, everything is covered. So for video, the third point is for video and telephone mediation sessions, all permitted participants will be identified at any time they are participating, viewing, or hearing. And if a non-participant observes or hears any part of a session, they'll immediately notify those on the session of that occurrence. So this is where you're asking people to fess up if, hey, you know, I was watching this, but my girlfriend walked in the room, but she walked out. Because if you're trying to establish trust, you need to have that. My fourth is that in the event that we have a technical difficulty where Zoom isn't working, we will switch to a telephone conference format. So I use freeconferencecall.com, so we could switch to that. Zoom also has a telephone function if you're having problems with the video. Now, there may be situations where someone says, look, I'm having a problem with video and I'm okay if I just listen and she's on, or vice versa. Again, I have that it's easier with none of us, either we're all, none of us are on. So those are my 4 kind of bullet points on my agreement to mediate. Do you have anything else you would include, Carl? Or do you think that covers it?
Well, let me just say that Bruce Matez and I are going to be doing a webinar on May 4th. We're going to be talking about privilege, confidentiality, agreements to mediate, what you should be putting in them. So there'll be a more extensive discussion about all those topics on May 4th, and a notice will be going out in another week or so for that. So please tune into that one. We'll be trying to collect a number of provisions from people and discussing what should go in there and what concerns are. What happens if people don't put them in? Don't abide by them? What are the real world consequences?
All right, and again, I'll make available my outline afterwards. So my next session is on getting paid. And I know that we've had a number of questions on the list. And so I'm going to talk about my practice, which is mostly private divorce mediation clients. And when I meet with them in session, for the most part, it's pay as you go, and they pay me for any work done between sessions at the next session. So, in the same way they pay me after the session, when I meet with them, they're paying me after the session when I do a mediation session online. And usually I will either use my Square, and in that point, I'll enter their credit card information. They'll give it to me over the phone, but I'm not saving their credit card data, or I'm invoicing them through PayPal and they're paying me. So, you know, although people talked about Venmo and Zelle, and I will accept payments that way, I just want to get paid. And so for me, I make it easy for them to pay me. Square also has a billing function, and you can use that. I'm typically not taking a retainer, and I don't like the idea of keeping clients' credit card information. There's so many issues with the credit card fraud, numbers being violated, that I'd rather not have a client's credit card information. But again, everyone can practice the way that they feel comfortable. I won't move ahead with the next session unless I've been paid. And then in terms of writing a memorandum of understanding, for me, I ask them for 50% deposit before I start writing the memorandum, and then 50% after we've done that. And I usually send them in a PDF file. Of course, most people are technically proficient and they could take a PDF file and copy it and paste it into Word. But the further you get into the mediation, the more trust each of you has with each other. And I haven't found that I've had any problems collecting. So that's where I am with getting paid. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer that. I'm sure that there are other people who also are dealing with this who might have some other suggestions. I think it's really important that you focus on, you know, making sure that you don't lose track of getting paid, because the more clients owe you, the harder it is to get paid. So I want to talk next about some mistakes I've made in the initial sessions, and I made a ton of them. So, and you will as well, but you learn by doing. So first of all, not scheduling sufficient breaks, because really, in some ways, I've found whether it's in session or on Zoom, I have more energy than the clients. I mean, as much as this is tiring for us, it's doubly tiring for them because this is their conflict. So recognizing that they need to be able to take breathers. In one of my sessions, when I was doing this in another room, my husband walked in the middle of the session and decided to change his clothing. That was really a lot of fun. There was no indecent exposure, but it was certainly egg on my face, but live and learn. So one of the things I found that it's harder to is I lose more track of time when I'm doing these sessions. So I have to kind of keep my eye on the clock. And when I meet in person, I'm looking at a clock. I'm oftentimes having people in the waiting room. I know when my next session is. So I'm more cognizant of time. So I have to be careful of time. And also, it's harder sometimes to realize the clients have reached their burnout point when you're in these sessions. I talked before about when I was in a session, all of a sudden, wife walked out without any notification, but I thought she was upset with something that was said. But in fact, she had gone out to deal with, I think, their child or to get some water. So I think it's a good protocol to say, if you have to leave, just let us know, and then we'll all take a break. So I guess one of the challenges I had in the last Zoom session I had is, even though what I do at the beginning of a session is go through an agenda, agree on what we're going to talk about, in the last 5 minutes, someone brings up an issue. And where I would have said in a regular session, let's just put that on the agenda for the next session, I started that conversation. And I should have really put it, kind of put it into the agenda for next time. I've also found, because clients can't bring me physical documents, sometimes I'm having a hard time seeing documents, and I'm relying on their word, or I'm relying on a summary. I really want to see a document. For instance, I have clients who might have retirement savings, and some of it may be pre-tax and tax, but they're not really reading the document properly. So for me, it's important that I see the document. I've had clients who say that, I've told them they can drop off a binder with their documents in, or they can send me PDFs. A lot of times they're sending me 1 page at a time of a 10-page PDF document. They're not copying it into one document. So I'm getting a lot of these documents that takes time to sift through, and I'm not getting the documents in time for the session. So I'm living and learning that I have to make sure I have documents before I proceed to the next session, losing track of time, finding the right private place to do this. I have a cat here, but he's being very quiet, but sometimes, you might have pets who also can interrupt a session. I'm curious if anyone else has any mistakes they would want to share. You've been doing these webinars. Is there anything you've learned from doing the webinars in terms of things you're doing better now than you did in the past, Carl?
The major thing we did, but it was pretty early, was not assuming that people knew how to do this. And so I've always had a technical dry run about a week ahead of time of a webinar. And so we see whether people's videos or webcams are good. If not, I send them a webcam. We know what happens when, we start this promptly at 12 o'clock. There's a countdown. So everyone's role and is identified and what they're going to do. So other than that, not a lot. You of course get better at doing it with just practice. That's everything. Practice,
I have to give a lot of credit. I've been on other webinars where they're supposed to start at noon and they're not starting, and you're wondering what is going on. Why aren't we starting? And they start at 12:05 where you're supposed to start at noon. So it creates a lot of angst among the people who are attending, whether it's their computer or whether, they signed on to the wrong link.
Ours always start. Now, that's one of the reasons, though, because I've only been doing webinars, that I don't know as much about other things because I haven't had to deal with them. And so I've been trying to research what some of these other issues are with respect to meetings, especially now with security, et cetera. And we have a lot of questions pending here about how do you use separate meeting rooms. And if we have any time at the end, I'll tell you what I know and what I don't know.
Okay. So in terms of what I'm going to do and I want to leave some time at the end so we can do that, I want to talk about some safety concerns and caveats, some pluses to online mediation and some minuses to online mediation. And then I'm going to turn it back to you. And my first in terms of concerns is, I've done thousands of in-person mediations, and it takes time to become proficient doing those. And I've done, a couple. I mean, I haven't done a ton of these. It takes time to understand the visual cues from Zoom versus in person, the body language. I mean, one thing when people walk into your office, the size of the person can be imposing or not. You can't tell that when you're all sitting down. And so a lot of times you're not getting that feel. Sometimes the dynamic between the couple is something that's easier to read when they're sitting in your office. It's harder to read when you're in Zoom. So it is a learning experience. I'm concerned, and I have that safety concern or that privacy concern regarding recordings. And it's okay. It's good to be a little paranoid about that. Sometimes you don't know who's in the room, and you don't know who's listening outside the room. So there's that concern. And some of the same concerns are when you're having a phone conversation with the clients versus in person. So I don't think I'm as uncomfortable about phone meetings because I've done them a lot longer. So it is that they're moving parts to this technology. It takes time to get used to it. So I'm sure a month from now, I'll be saying something a little bit different. And before I move on to some of the pluses, are there any questions? Because I'm just looking at the number in terms of questions, but you can tell me.
Here's one, just curious, is Anju's connection wireless? There's a lag. Carl's is clearer and audio is better. I know you're both using the same webcam, so.
It's not just a function of the webcam, it's a function of your internet service, it's a function of your computer, maybe my function of how far I am from the modem.
Right.
Could be the time of day, could be
you
how
are
windy it is.
wireless. You're in wireless, you're not hardwired in. It also could be your computer. How old is your computer?
Yeah, 4 years old.
And do you have a lot of, you might have a lot of resources used on it. There are a lot of different things that come into play.
Okay. Well, that's good for me to know, so I appreciate you saying that to me. So I'm going to talk about some of the pluses of this. First of all, this is the only game in town right now. If you want to have a mediation practice, basically you've got to be using online. It doesn't have to be Zoom, but it has to be something. From a client perspective, they are in a difficult situation and they need to move forward. Many of the people I'm talking to are locked in the same house with the person they want to get divorced from. It was different when you were living with a person, but you could go out, go to your sister's, go to the store. Now you're there 24/7. If you're in a small apartment, it's going to be worse than if you're in a larger house where you have outdoors. So, if you're doing this, you're helping clients move forward. And that's really important. You're providing a service. So another plus is you're not commuting, stuck in traffic, looking for parking, and the clients aren't doing the same. I mean, especially from my Hoboken office, it's stressful getting there. So being able to do this out of your home is a plus. It's more feasible to do shorter meetings. You haven't driven to my office. By the time you drive to Hoboken and get parking, no one's doing a half-hour meeting, but you can do a half-hour Zoom meeting easily. So I found many of my clients are using Zoom for Business. They're very comfortable with it. They'll tell you, you're my 4th Zoom meeting of the day. So it's very familiar technology to them. So they're comfortable doing it. Our clients don't have to sit in the same room with each other. That can be a relief for them. And that may be one of the reasons, one of the main reasons that even after this is over, that some people will say, I don't want to, let's do it over Zoom. I don't want to sit with him in the same room. Clients, if someone's late, it isn't as aggravating. They can go and do the dishes and come back. They're not sitting in your waiting room feeling unnerved. So that's a benefit. You can mediate evenings, weekends. You're not having to drive into the office. And there are fewer disruptions to your own life as a service provider. People are on their own turf, so they feel comfortable. They feel like they're on equal footing. We each have our own Zoom account. Doesn't feel like it's my office and you're coming to that. And for mediators, it's an opportunity to expand their reach outside their county, maybe in a different state if you know the laws for that state in terms of family law. So it's a new opportunity for clients to maybe expand their practice. And then on the negative side, I think there's nothing like a face-to-face meeting. And so far, all the Zoom meetings I've had are with people I already had met face-to-face. So it's going to be a new experience for me starting with a client on Zoom. But I think it's a little more difficult. It's a little more difficult to understand all those cues. I think for us as service providers, there's no separation between our home life and our work life when we're doing work out of the home, doing Zoom. I've found that clients are not preparing the same way. I think e-documents or looking at print, these are much more consuming than if clients just bring their batch of documents into the office and we can skim through those. We are dependent on technology and technology can fail. Again, it's sometimes easy to miss language and body language cues. I don't think online mediation is the same level of commitment or preparation as coming into the office. Sometimes this seems a little less formal. And sometimes I think there is a benefit to the formality of the process. Now, here's an interesting one that I picked up in another webinar, which is that different levels of comfort with technology may create another imbalance of power. We talk about imbalances of power in so many ways, but if someone's very familiar with the technology, they may be sitting a lot more comfortably than the other. And then on the negative side, it's easy for non-local providers to enter your geographic market. So this could be, in a sense, a new disadvantage in your marketing practice going forward when someone says, you know, they can work in any county in New Jersey. So for me, you know, there are pluses and minuses, but as I said, since this is what we have right now, this is what we have to work with. And I think it's making the most of what we have. And you know, hopefully we'll be meeting face to face. I certainly miss my colleagues.
I just miss leaving the house. So anything would be better.
So are there any other questions before you take the next couple of minutes to just talk about meeting rooms and so forth?
Let me talk about some of the ones that come up. There's a lot of questions about meeting rooms and caucusing and those kinds of things. So if you have a small number of people, say 2 clients and the mediator, you can put one or both in the waiting room. And that person in the waiting room cannot see, cannot hear. Now let's say you have a larger mediation and it involves attorneys and client, or attorney and client in each in a separate location. You've got that in a variety of clients and lawyers. I think that you can put attorney and client in a meeting room, which is obviously not a real meeting room, but they have their own place where they can converse. Same thing with other people. You can put them on hold, etc. I do not know how to do that. I've never come up with a situation. I've never thought about it. So I don't know how to do that. And another question that came up is, where do we find these Zoom tutorials?
On Zoom.
No, the easiest way to do it is don't go to Zoom. Easiest way is Google your question. How do I use meeting room? What is a Zoom meeting room? That will then take you to the right place in Zoom. So that's how I've always done it. And I think it works better than trying to go to Zoom, and because their search function isn't always as good as Google's. So that's how I do that. So if anyone,
so there was a comment that there are lots of good tutorials, and if some of our members wanted to put a test together, they could do that.
Yeah.
And they could switch off being
right.
hosts.
Someone asked, does the webinar cost, have a webinar option? How much more is that than just the meeting? I think it's $40 a month. I'm not exactly sure. NJAPM has the basic meeting plus webinar. I think it's around with about $500 a year with a yearly discount, something in that range. I don't think many people are going to be doing webinars. You're going to be doing meetings. So,
Okay, even large organizations like the AFCC are using the meetings, and they have more than 300-400 people on the meetings. They're just muting everyone except the speakers. So right. The technology is working fine. The first time they did this, they had not gone to the larger meetings. So they would, they stopped at 100 people, and it was like musical chairs to get into the meeting, but that has been corrected.
Right. So, I mean, there are a lot of questions I'm afraid we just haven't been able to get to. And so I apologize for that. We've have a lot of participants on this. People have stayed on it throughout pretty much the entire webinar. So I really appreciate that as well. Again, we're both beginners in this. I hope it was helpful. I enjoyed it. And we're right at the end. So thank you very much. Thank you, Anju.
And thank you, Carl, for inviting me, and you do a terrific job. So appreciate it.
And if any of you out there have ideas for webinars that you want to do, please get in touch with me. We're looking for things. As I said, we're going to have one on May 4th on privilege, confidentiality, Uniform Mediation Act, agreements to mediate. And I think Larry Jones is working on a couple more. So we're doing a lot of these so that we don't go crazy as we're forced to stay in our homes. So thank you all for participating, and we'll see you at the next webinar.